Everyone hits a bump in the road. What do you do with it? Be inspired as we explore the ways people experience, navigate, and manage the ups and downs and twists and turns in this road trip called life. Hi, today we welcome Dante Prada to Bump in the Road. At 38 years old, Dante was in the prime of his life. He was Director General of BPZ Energy in Lima, Peru. His young family was thriving and he was training for an Ironman. Pain in his back sent him to the hospital where they found a 12 by 8 centimeter tumor pressing on his spine. He was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. 9 months of chemo followed, but the tumor did not disappear. Looking for options and information, Dante flew to Houston for a medical consult. He learned he'd been misdiagnosed, and his only hope was a rescue chemotherapy, followed by high dose beam chemo and a bone marrow transplant. Cancer is enough of a bump in the road, but that's only the beginning of an amazing story. Dante went on to create a concierge medical service called Lighthouse that helps people from Latin America access and navigate the Houston medical system. Today, please welcome Dante Prada. Welcome, Dante Prada. I'm so glad to have you here today.
It's my pleasure, Pat. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. You have such an amazing story. I'm not even going to try to recap it, but I'm going to turn it over to you and ask you to give us an overview of your story, which took you from Lima, Peru, up here to the States and onwards.
Yeah, more than happy to share my story with you and more people. Hope my story will inspire others and help others that are dealing with difficult times.
Your story is incredibly inspiring. Why don't we start in Lima, where you had an amazing life? Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm 44 years old, Pat. Since I was very young, I have been always into sports and a healthy lifestyle. When I was 18 years old, I got into college and immediately had to get a full time job to pay my tuition on business administration and also help my parents at that time. That was 1993, 92, 93. Um, then, when I was 20 years old, I met my love of my life, Blanca, who later became my wife and mother of my two kids, Sofia and Franco. So when I was 39 years old, almost 20 years after I met Blanca, I was happily married with a beautiful family on top of my career and training for a full Ironman. When suddenly I had this bump on the road. I was diagnosed with cancer, lymphoma. I couldn't believe it.
That's unbelievable to go from Iron Man to cancer.
Yes, I was on the best shape of my life. I was an executive oil and gas employee. I had a beautiful family. Everything was going well. When suddenly I started feeling these strong back pains, went to the hospital and MRI, and the MRI showed that I had a big tumor involving my spine that ended up being a lymphoma. So after that diagnosis, I started a protocol of 12 chemotherapies. Between the second and the third chemotherapy, I suffered a severe and atypical pneumonia. We still don't know what caused that pneumonia. Could be the medicines, could be a virus, could be a bacteria. We don't know what happened. But I got this very severe and atypical pneumonia. However, after I recover from the
Yeah.
pneumonia, I continue with my. Go on. Yes.
No, how far apart were your chemo treatments out of curiosity? Was it every 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks?
The protocol was uh, every 15 days, around 6 hours of ABVD chemo.
Not much fun, is it?
No, wasn't that fun. Wasn't that fun. It was tough. It was tough. It wasn't easy. Um, Especially because every day was different. I mean, you plan to go to the hospital every 15 days and you schedule your life based on those 15 days and the recovery days. But then when you go to the hospital and you are ready to get the chemo and your white cells are so low that you can't get the chemo, then everything changes. And then you need to reschedule your family schedule. It was tough. Not only the feeling of the chemo, but also the fact that everything changed every day.
No, you went through 9
Um,
months of this, right?
yeah, so I got 9 months. During those 9 months of chemo, I got a total of 12 chemotherapies. But after those chemos, the disease was still there. So it turns out that I was misdiagnosed. I didn't have
That's
Hodgkin's lymphoma.
terrible. I mean, to think. Mhm.
Yeah, it was a what a surprise, right? Um, I was misdiagnosed 9 months before. I had 12 chemotherapies for something that I didn't have. So the doctors in Houston gave me a second opinion, and they told me you now need a new protocol of chemo. It's a rescue chemo, and if you get in remission, you will need a bone marrow transplant. This ended up being a typical non-Hodgkin's lymphoma instead of a classic Hodgkin's lymphoma, which was what originally the doctors told me in Lima.
And they have very different treatment protocols. So, when you were in Lima, you were actually an executive with an oil company, weren't you?
Yes, yes. So when I was diagnosed in May of 2015, I was the head of an oil and gas company in Peru. Um, and during those first 9 months, I was working as usual, even though I had the chemo. Sometimes after the chemotherapies, I went for a couple of hours to the office, and depending on how I felt the following days, I was going to the office as well. So pretty much I kept working on a normal on a daily basis from home or sometimes to the office or some meetings. But yes, I was working for this oil and gas company on this classic executive role, very stressed and with a lot of hours of work.
So, you ultimately made the decision to leave the to leave an executive your executive position at the oil company, didn't you?
Yes, but so when when I needed to move to Houston for the bone marrow transplant, so when I got in remission after the new protocol of chemo, the rescue chemo, um, with my wife, we decided to move to Houston for the bone marrow transplant. So I didn't want to get the transplant in Lima. I had the opportunity to move to Houston for the transplant. So we did. I had the transplant in August of 2016. And after a few months, while recovering from the transplant, I decided to quit my job. I was very weak by that time. I didn't have enough. I didn't have the mindset to go back to this executive role again. So with my wife, we took the decision to stop and think what to do. I didn't have it clear by that time. The only thing that I had clear is that I needed to rest and enjoy time with my family.
Boy, just moving from Lima to Houston alone is such a massive change. I can't even begin to imagine it. But one of the things that really intrigued me about your story was that you decided for a period of time while you sorted things out to drive for Uber.
Yes, yes, that was a very nice story. So I remember this was February of 2017. By that time, I started feeling better, but I was not clear about what to do in my life. I was already gone from the oil and gas. And one day I woke up and I told my wife, you know what? I think I'm going to become an Uber driver. I think that's going to give me the feeling that I am becoming useful again. I will manage my own time. This should be easy. It's just driving, meeting people. So why not? Instead of staying at home doing nothing, I will go out and drive for Uber. So I registered myself, and in February of 2017, I started driving, and I loved it. It was hilarious.
But what did you like best about it?
I think that all the coincidence that I found out while driving people in Houston. Houston, it's a world medical center. It's one of the top in the world. So all of, not all, but a lot of my passengers were international patients that came to Houston for similar reasons that the one I came from.
So out
So
of this,
that was that was
what
that
were
was pretty interesting.
yeah, it is. Houston's just a massive medical mecca, actually. And I find it the coincidence of you're going to Houston, driving and running into so many other people in similar circumstances kind of led to your next step, didn't it?
Yes, yes, absolutely. So Uber, in my view, like set the stage for me to create later on Lighthouse, which is what which is basically the mission I think I have in life right now. I remember one of my clients when I was an Uber driver. Um, he was outside a house wearing a mask that I immediately recognized as the mask of a person that just had a transplant, a bone marrow transplant. And this guy with his mom was with 102 fever. I said straight to the ER, and we went straight to the ER at one of the hospitals in Houston, and he stayed there for a week. I visited him later on to see how I was doing, and he was good. So all those things, those coincidences, gave me this sort of idea that there is a need to help international patients coming to Houston for cancer treatment.
The systems in the medical system in Peru is, I would guess, very different than what you found in Houston.
Yes, it's very different, very, very different.
What were some of the
The whole
difficulties
system.
in navigating the Houston system for you?
Well, the first thing, Pat, is that Houston, Texas is huge. There's a classic, everything is big in Texas. The hospitals are huge places. I can't remember how many. elevators you find in one single hospital. Coming from Latin America, where things are not that well developed, it's overwhelming. Um, Many times you don't understand the language. You have fear about actually going to Houston or not going to Houston. How you get in touch with the hospital, um, where I'm going to stay. So there's a lot of questions that a family from Latin America will have when they need to make that decision to move to Houston for a second opinion or a treatment.
And Lighthouse, you created Lighthouse to help people with that. Tell us a little bit about
So yeah,
Lighthouse.
sure. Um, well, out of this idea, Lighthouse was born, right? Lighthouse is a medical concierge service company, Pat, that provides guidance and support to international patients that travel to Houston for second opinions or treatments. Um, we start from doing the first contact with the international offices of the hospitals, expediting medical appointments, receiving their medical records and pathologies, finding a place to stay, buying their groceries in advance, picking them up from the airport, going with them to the first medical appointment to help them to navigate in the hospital, asking important questions to the doctors. The fact that I went through this uh, gave me a good opportunity to ask questions to the doctors that many times the patients don't think because they are so overwhelmed.
I think going
Um,
to a hospital is overwhelming no matter what, but going to a hospital in such a different culture, I can't even imagine what that experience had to be like.
yeah, it's very, very, very difficult. I every day that I'm there with the families, I can see how hard this is for not only the patient but the family. So Lighthouse is that, no? Lighthouse is a light that guides the families and the patients during these challenging times.
I think that's amazing. I think anybody going through something like cancer needs help. And I'm just so impressed with the scope of services that you offer through Lighthouse. It is amazing. What was one of the biggest challenges that you faced in pulling together Lighthouse?
Well, it's a very interesting question because at the beginning, I was feeling so bad for because the people I started helping with Lighthouse, they asked me the question, how much I owe you for your work, right? And I was feeling so sad to charge for my service because I was doing this to help people. But then I realized that they wanted to pay for the service. So my first challenge, Pat, was to convince myself that this was not only a this wasn't a non-profit organization, that it was a business, and that I needed to charge for my time. So putting together um, a spreadsheet to understand how much it was fair to charge was one of the most challenging things that I faced when I created Lighthouse. Because the services, I knew the services because I went through this. I I I moved to Houston. I dealt with all these walls during my journey in Houston that I knew what was needed. But giving having the idea that I needed to charge for my services, that was one of the most challenging things I faced when I created Lighthouse.
I think sometimes it's hard to marry your heart with the realities of making a living, and I think that's something a lot of people struggle with, actually. And I think, like you have to come down. You have to distill your decision making to a point where you realize you're bringing an enormous amount of value to the table.
And this came from the families, but they were the ones telling me that. So they were the ones convincing me to do it.
That is just such it's such a great story. What are your plans for Lighthouse after Corona? Because obviously Corona has been a bit of a bump in the road in and of itself.
Absolutely, yes. Borders are closed in Latin America. Um, Nobody's flying. Countries are completely locked down. I had four families from Peru coming to Houston for treatment. They couldn't travel. So today I'm trying to help them doing online medicine, which is, well, in the United States, it's well known as telemedicine. So I had some clients that were able to had a second opinion using one of these WebEx platforms where they can have an appointment with a doctor through the computer. So I'm helping families that way.
Is this business model something that could extend to other countries throughout Latin America?
Oh, I think it's a great opportunity. I think this is going to be a boom in the next few years. I think this will open the door for families in Latin America that thought a few years ago that having a second opinion from a doctor in the United States was unreachable because of the costs. But now with technology, I think that the amount of families in any country in Latin America that will have access to a doctor using a computer is going to be enormous. So there is a big, big, big opportunity there.
Now, do you actually track down the specialist for them to talk to so that they're getting in touch with the right person at the right hospital?
Yes. So there is a especially in the private practices in Houston, you have a list of doctors in different specialities, right? So you
Mhm.
have the doctor that is expert in breast cancer. You have the doctor that is expert in lymphomas, leukemias. So yes, there is a list of doctors in every practice that are available for international patients using the computer. Yes, we have that information.
To your travels from being an oil executive to giving it all up, to coming to Houston, to driving for surviving a transplant, driving for Uber, and then founding this incredible organization, Lighthouse. It's just amazing. If you could rewrite your story in any way, would you?
I thought a lot about this question. And you know what? If I could rewrite my story, I wouldn't change anything. But um,
Wow.
everything I have gone has made me who I am right now. I wouldn't even change my cancer journey. Actually, cancer gave me the opportunity to discover my mission in life, which is serve others. So I, I, I wouldn't change anything if I have the opportunity to rewrite my story.
What sort of advice would you give somebody facing any sort of bump in the road? What are some of the key things you have to do to just survive some of these life incidents?
Something, and I'm going to say it on my personal side. One of the things that worked for me, in addition to being positive all the time, was to create and and visualize moments of happiness with my family. I always share those ideas, crazy ideas, with my wife and my kids. Always talk with Blanca about these ideas. Even though I took one day at a time, I never stopped dreaming, Pat, and coming up with wonderful plans for our future. Those plans gave me the strength and the motivation to navigate through those difficult times into a brighter future. Um, Never stopped dreaming. Even though I was feeling pain, I never stopped dreaming. I always had something in my head to create to create the feeling that there's a future, there's a brighter future in the road. Even though there are bumps, there's a light at the end. And that gave me a lot of strength and faith.
It's so interesting as I talk to people about their bumps in the road. Almost everybody says they would not change anything, even though they've been through just extraordinary challenges. And I can't thank you enough for sharing your story today. It is just an amazing story, and I'm so grateful to have you here. Thank you very, very much. Thank you for joining us today. I hope you found something in today's podcast that inspires you along your own life path, because sometimes a bump in the road is actually a portal into a more conscious and meaningful life. Bump in the Road is a production of Cancer Road Trip. Subscribe to the podcast, follow us on social media at Cancer Road Trip, and you can learn more at www.cancerroadtrip.com. Until next time, be safe and be well.